As a product person and as an engineer, when you see the results and you can measure them, it's awesome. At McKesson, I've been gone for a little while, but we had already had 1 million treatment decisions made in our tools. And at Amazon, we could measure how much improvement in patient safety and error reduction that we had made. And so going back to just more of the pure engineering roots, seeing that quantitative measure on something is an impact to a patient's life, quality of life is amazing.
Welcome, Wolfpack fans. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Anita Vila, who is a mission-driven healthcare product executive with over 15 years of experience. She's designed and scaled innovative, user-friendly solutions across pharmacy, precision medicine, and clinical decision support. She's led powerhouse teams at Amazon and McKesson, always focused on improving outcomes, reducing costs, and making the patient and clinical experience more delightful. And guess what? She's a proud two-time graduate of NC State University.
Go Wolfpack.
Yes, and you were industrial engineering, which I love, and from this Park Shops building where you spent a lot of time undergrad to the Silicon Valley, Anita's journey is packed with bold moves, smart strategies, and a heart for impact. Get ready to be inspired by how she's making healthcare better for everyone, one idea at a time.
Thanks, Marcy. Really excited to be on today.
We're really excited to have you. And as I told that intro about you, you've made some really gutsy career moves in your lifetime, leaving roles without clear next steps. That actually scares me. I'm a person who needs a plan. What gave you the courage to walk away, and what did the voice in your head sound like in these moments?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. And looking back, it's been 25 years almost since I graduated from NC State. So it's been a long time. And I think something that my experience both here and as I went through my career journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, was building a thirst for learning has always been one of my top priorities. And so as I went through the various phases of my job, which started at Dell Computers in Austin, Texas in 2001, at the height of the tech industry, but then the dot-com bubble burst. It was a really interesting time to be a new person on the ground at a time where Dell actually had their first layoffs ever. And so these kind of pivotal moments in your career where you come in and there's instability are actually an opportunity. And I've really looked at my career that way. And at these moments where I've learned a lot, but there's something more. And that something more changes over time. But I feel like as I've reflected back, I can pinpoint what was that something more that was needed. And that's been my big catalyst to make a change. And to your point, we can talk about more, being scared about making those moves versus confident. I'm, probably somewhere in between all the time, but that's somehow a comfort zone for me, which I know is a little bit unique.
It's unique because a lot of our listeners think it's important to have everything mapped out and it's a spreadsheet, and they're high achievers, clearly, because they're here. And now they're going out into the world, into the first job. That's a lot of our listeners. Yeah. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So navigating that can feel a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it's funny. I give a lot of career talks, and I love coming back to NC State to do so. And often I start with a slide that says, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and you don't need to either. And I just try to disarm that notion that you have to have a set plan. And I remember when I graduated and then when I was on the faculty at NC State, I'd really get students to focus on, is there an industry that drives you? Back in 2001, consumer electronics was a really exciting place to be. The form factors were shrinking. Everyone was starting to have laptops, and, technology was more ubiquitous. And I tried to take a position and really try to kind of push and challenge others to do the same, that don't worry about what your exact role is going to be. Get into the industry, learn about the customers those industries serve, because that's probably what's going to excite you. You will unlikely enter a job to use an exact equation that you loved in your math class, If you're not too rigid with that, doors will open that you won't ever know were there, which, again, I think has just been something I've really clung on to over time, because many of the roles I've stepped into, I didn't know very much about them prior to that first day. But just having the confidence to go for it. I think is something that it takes time to develop. And I think having others around you that help to support that and help to relieve maybe that sense of anxiety that you have to know what those steps are, to think that if you don't take this first step, the second step is impossible. I think that's an important role of leaders as well.
And this is great that you touched on confidence because we've talked a lot about imposterism phenomenon in this podcast with guests. And I think everyone's had it. Do you have it at all?
Oh, for sure. I plan for it. I think that's when I remember at Amazon, hiring new folks into healthcare that had not been in healthcare previously, and just reassuring folks, you're going to feel dumb. I think it's okay to feel dumb for 3 months, and at 6 months, some things will click. And at 9 months, your eyes will really open wide and you'll be like, oh, now I see. And I think you have to plan for that discomfort. And if you're not okay with being uncomfortable, you're also not going to do something that's really challenging. And I think just reassuring yourself and telling yourself that, sometimes it's self-talk for sure, but I even liked to go ahead and tell my employees that. I was like, you're going to feel dumb, it's fine. And the question you asked me this week, in 3 months, you may feel like I need to ask you again. Ask it. I expect this to be the feelings that we have, even for senior, seasoned people who start a new role. So as every new role I start, I try to brace myself because it's not comfortable, but it's expected. I think maybe that's a way to think about it.
That is the perfect boss, because that is a human being who realizes that none of us are perfect and infallible. Did you ever feel like some of the moves you made were a mistake? And I'm going to ask this because a lot of students say, what if I don't like it?
Yeah, I think what I would say to those students is, it's only a mistake if you stay too long. I think it's important to recognize during that uncomfortable period, you may feel like the right decision is to bolt. But knowing that you should expect to be uncomfortable and that you need to push past those feelings of being the dumbest one in the room. You almost want to be, honestly. Like that's another kind of point that I still think about today. I want to join a company and be surrounded by people where I feel that humility often, and people are pushing on your thoughts. But I think in the not staying too long, I can tell you a story just from when I left academia. And in kind of going back to your introduction, my husband had gotten an offer at Amazon in San Francisco, and I was a professor at NC State in the industrial engineering department. For the prior 2 years, I had been doing some consulting with Dr. Julie Ivey, who's now at University of Michigan, and I was getting this pull and this feeling to go back to industry. We were doing industry-based consulting. He got this opportunity, and I thought, let's do it. This is going to be a game-changing, opportunity for us to move to the Bay Area. There's so much going on. This was in 2016. And I left my job at NC State with no job, moving our family across the country and seeking the job there. And it was a very kind of difficult time to figure out, as someone who may be pegged as an academic, even though I had worked at Dell. I had my academic experience. I'd done my consulting. You're not fitting any one mold, like, at all. And so it was really about finding what that right first step was, knowing that that's likely going to be a segue to something else. And I went to work at Gartner. It's a consulting and it's an advisory firm for executives. I was able to get a role in the healthcare advisory space. And it was the perfect segue from my academic career and just being a subject matter expert in healthcare. That's what that role desires and requires. It also requires you to write lots of white papers and write your thoughts and share those with the industry. Again, as an academic, you're writing all the time. So writing is something you do part and parcel. But in the staying too long kind of, and knowing when does this become something that's, does change the trajectory of my career, I knew as an engineer and as someone who likes to build and develop that being an advisor doesn't allow you to take your advice and actually implement it and execute it. And that if I stayed in that role for too long, there would be a time point where I would then start to pigeonhole myself into being more of a consultant advisor career path. And I knew ultimately that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I stayed for 2 years. I used that time to really get a huge, broad purview of the healthcare landscape, working from, smaller health systems and hospitals who didn't have a lot of technology to those who were 10 years ago looking at AI and everything in between. And so it really helped me take a step back, because when you're in academia, you're often only working with those at the forefront, and you don't really know what the majority of any one industry is doing. So I look at that role as one where I knew I stepped into it for a transition period. I knew I could gain so much from the job, and it would help me then kind of take a next step back into industry where you could describe your experience and in a way that is a little more industry friendly than an academic role may be to others.
And this is very strategic, thinking ahead about, I don't want to get pigeonholed here and intentionally leaving at the right time. But you mentioned juggling a two-career couple. You mentioned your husband. And I want to hear a little bit more about that, because some students that are thinking about sharing their life with another person, and how do we actually do that if we're both super career driven? Did you have a conversation about, I'll move for you, then you move for me, and how did that evolve?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's one that, my husband graduated from NC State also in 2001, electrical engineering, and we've been married since then for 24 years. So we've had a lot of these conversations and have had to make a lot of decisions similarly. And actually, when we were in Austin and we were at Dell, we moved back to Raleigh because I got this crazy idea of going back to grad school, which I didn't foresee at all happening to me. And so we moved back, and Raleigh's been a bit of that home base, because we've gone Austin to Raleigh to San Francisco, back to Raleigh. And I think that we've been fortunate to have a similar mental model on kind of exploring and having your career be more of an adventure. And neither of us are looking to be complacent for a long period of time. But certainly a reason and a driver we moved from San Francisco back to Raleigh was the commute times there. And coming back to Raleigh from San Francisco was definitely a big decision from a career perspective. At that time, a lot of companies were not supportive of remote work. And so we had to make that decision a little bit eyes wide open that it may change the careers that we would do next if we weren't allowed to stay remote with our San Francisco roles. Then the pandemic happened. So I think in maybe what could have been our reality versus what ended up being with the pandemic, who then supported remote roles, and we didn't ultimately have to make a hard decision at that time. It's something I don't know what would have happened there. But a reason we wanted to move back from San Francisco, his role, he had about an hour and a half commute each way.
Ugh.
Yeah, and we had 2 kids. And so I was on all the logistics duty, which as an IE, sure, I could optimize, but it was definitely, constraining. And so I think, for students, and I know from advising hundreds of students at NC State that these conversations are even ones they're thinking about at the beginning, is try to be as unconstrained as possible till you need to make those decisions, because every year of your life, you're going to have different opportunities. And I try not to, even though in the Gartner example, it seemed like I was thinking a little bit ahead. Mostly, I try to not think too far ahead, honestly, because I think it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict the future, especially now with such rapid change in technology and what opportunities are really going to be those presented.
It sounds like you had your priorities mapped out, things that were important to you with your family, and being in the car for 3 hours a day did not compute with that bigger picture. So making these big leaps across country takes a lot of courage. Did you feel scared, and how do you deal with the fear?
Yeah, maybe for me, the fear is a little more of exhilarating, if that makes sense. And so if I'm doing one thing for too long, or I think even living in one place for too long, I miss that sense of change. And I think having it in some facet of your life, whether that's maybe you're in the same job, but you move, or maybe you changed job opportunities significantly, or just some other big life change. I think you got to look for which of those levers you want to push on and know what matches your personality. That's something I talk a lot about in those career talks, is over time, that's going to change as well. And there's going to be times where taking that risk, that same level of risk in 10 years is not going to be, tenable for you. But today it's fine. And I think being flexible with yourself so that you're not trying to fit that, square peg in a round hole, and beat yourself up about it is really an important thing to acknowledge that changes over time.
And your career is so impressive, Anita. Just looking at all the different product teams you've built, working on very complex problems and impactful areas in healthcare, which of course affects every person because we're all trying to stay healthy. And what would you say is something about leadership in that high stakes environment that no one really talks about, but we need to hear? Give me something juicy here.
I'm sure everyone has talked ad nauseum about almost every facet of leadership, but I think what I continue to come back to and I really enjoy also as part of jobs that are complex and have high stakes is earning trust. And I say that because I've had such an awesome opportunity to work so closely with clinicians. At Amazon, I worked every single day with my pharmacist partners, and we were delivering the products and tools that allow them to deliver fast medications to our end, customers and patients. And these features are, being developed by engineering and specified by product teams, but most importantly, in collaboration with those that use the products at the end of the day, which are our clinicians. And when you meet really hard decisions, when you have to face some really hard and tough questions, when you've built trust, it's easier. And that trust is built by being humble, by being transparent, by treating others with respect, regardless of their educational background, because these products really do take a village to build. At McKesson, I worked in the oncology area. So the tools that we built, the oncologists who were, sitting in front of a patient with a cancer diagnosis were using every day to choose what chemotherapy regimen or what biomarker genetic testing they should order. And they were using our features. And again, having the trust involving those individuals from the, on the ground clinicians working every day to their senior leaders, I think is a leadership quality that is probably the most important to me, but that I enjoy because that multidisciplinary aspect is, I think, where the magic happens oftentimes.
That must be so rewarding. We've all had people touched by cancer and to know that this is impacting them in a positive way.
Yeah. And I think as a product person and as an engineer, when you see the results and you can measure them, it's awesome. At the time, McKesson, I've been gone for a little while, but we had already had 1 million treatment decisions made in our tools. And at Amazon, we could measure how much improvement in patient safety and error reduction that we had made. And so going back to just more of the pure engineering roots, seeing that quantitative measure on something is an impact to a patient's life, quality of life is amazing. So I'm stuck with healthcare, regardless that it's one of the hardest industries to be in, for sure.
Yeah, you have found your niche. And, looking at your background with the academic PhD and working in the ivory tower, as we call it, and then going to, some people call the dark side, the industry side. Yeah. Can you compare and contrast those a little bit for a PhD who's coming out soon with their new degree, newly minted, wondering which direction to go?
Yeah. I think for me, I had a unique vantage point to my academic career because I had been in industry prior, which is very rare, at least at the time that I was in academia. And so for me, I was comfortable with the expected pace that you need to operate in on a daily basis and uncertainty and almost, lack of perfection at all times. And in academia, you have the benefit of a little bit more of that time to complete your work, but you have this immense challenge that every single thing must be an innovation. And so they both have their pressures. And I remember as a PhD student, and you're, wrapping up your dissertation and you thought you would stumble upon an article that looked like something you're publishing because it's like a race in a similar way to industry in that way. And you'd be like, oh my gosh, is my whole dissertation going to have to go out, out the window? And so it has its own stresses and you're very constrained to that innovation lens as you're finishing. And then as you're a tenure track faculty who needs to continue to publish and support students in publishing. And on the industry side, the pace is sometimes your competitors, a little bit different. It's not going to be another academic. It could be, another company that's racing against you. But your decision making sometimes needs to be at the minute level or at the hour level and not at the week or the month. And so I think a lot of it is just that introspection of what suits your strengths, and do you like to dive deep and have more time for deep research? And there's companies in industry that are more research oriented. And so PhD students that are still interested in research, may have opportunities to join organizations like that. But I think my top tip for them would be, if you think you're interested in industry and you didn't come from industry prior, because you probably would be able to answer that question for yourself, try to get an internship, shadow someone on a job, or reaching out to some alumni to see if you can have these frank conversations, because I think it's just that insight, and it's the lack of insight you tend to have as a student that makes the decision seem, less obvious than if you're able to get some actual on the ground experience and see what moves you. I was just going to say that I know for myself, that was the part that I started to miss during my academic career, was that pace of implementing innovations. Again, I think while I loved the opportunity to truly innovate and to work on, things that are under the AI umbrella, which is really cool because we weren't using that word, back then, a lot of these statistical concepts. But that drive to implementation, it was something that continued to be lacking for me. And from my Dell experience to my academic to then Gartner, was just like seeking to build and build faster. And I think that's what's been a good match with the health tech industry, which can move more at that pace while still acknowledging there's a lot of regulatory and compliance and things that maybe don't have you move as fast as a retail business or, something with less guardrails.
Yes, and thanks for explaining that, because something was missing clearly for you, which is why it spurred you to make these changes that you have made in the past. So now let's zoom into the future for our final question. So we're going to do a fast forward, and we're going to be sitting at a dinner party 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. And just imagine all your favorite people are surrounding you at this dinner party, and someone says, "You, Anita, are the person who..." blank, blank, blank. What would you like to hear as they finish that sentence?
Yeah, I think I would love to hear them say that I helped them take that leap that they were scared of. And I think that can maybe not even be a career. I know as I was leaving my last role at Amazon, I had several women come up to me and just acknowledge, they're like, wow, to see, what you do as a parent, and, they were young parents, meant a lot to them. And I think staying within the types of roles that they had, or changing jobs. I bumped into some students recently at the board meeting, and as they were kind of doing a round robin of introductions, and they said, Dr. Vila is the one that told me to take this job and helped me, push me to take this job, and I'm still there 10 years later. I think, mentorship is really important to me. And going back to trust, I think that's something you can apply in all facets of your life. And I think I had a huge opportunity to do that at NC State, and looking forward to what's next. And on the what's next, I in my leaps to the unknown and the abyss, I recently left Amazon and just decided to do one of those crazy things of a micro retirement of sorts and take a breather. Because it's been 24 years. It's been an awesome ride, but you need a rest from the awesome ride every once in a while. And so we just concluded about a month-long trip with my kids and with some of our family. My parents met us in Europe, and my brother-in-law and his family. And that's time I think you realize you don't get back, right? And so as I look towards those next steps, I'm still stubbornly in the healthcare space. Definitely continue to look at that mission that I've drawn out for myself, because I know that would keep me motivated and keep me going. And I feel great and refreshed to go tackle that next challenge, whatever it's going to be. So looking forward to sharing more when that comes to light.